right. Hello there, everyone. This is super last minute, so I don't know who's going to come, if anyone will come. But this is the private practice office hours. This is where I log in to YouTube live and answer questions, chat, talk about private practice, group practice, those kind of things to help point people in the right direction, give them resources, tips, things like that. We do have a couple of leftover questions from last private practice office hours, and then whatever questions come through, we'll also answer as well. And let's see. So the question that was left over from yesterday was about HIPAA compliant email. There was a comment, and someone had asked whether or not Google could be HIPAA compliant. And then if not, what are some other options? And so in terms of Google being HIPAA compliant, my understanding is that you can have Google email be HIPAA compliant. And the way we can do that is by signing up with Google. And actually, I'm going to share my screen here with you so you can see what Google says about it. Right here, you'll see that HIPAA compliance with Google Workspace and Cloud Identity is something that they do. And if you look right here, you can read through that. I will leave a link to this down below. But Google Workspace does have a HIPAA compliant way of making it HIPAA compliant. If you don't want to use that, there are other options as well. A couple of the platforms that I've heard about are Powbox. Powbox is a platform that you can use that's all HIPAA compliant. Let me see if I could actually pull that up real quick. Let's see if we can find Powbox. And if you can hear my air conditioning, please forgive me. It's very hot. I have to have that on, or I don't know if I'll make it through. So let me see here. Let's see. Okay, so we found it. Here's Powbox. Again, I'll leave links to this down below. I've never ever used Powbox, so I don't know how it works. But I do know it's a HIPAA compliant platform that other people have used. And right here you can see big companies use it, Walgreens, standard website here. But Powbox is an option for you. You can read through this if you want. And then the other thing that's important to know is that when I consulted a healthcare attorney, it was my understanding that not all of your communication has to be HIPAA compliant. You do have to have a HIPAA compliant method of communication available to clients. However, I don't think that every single form of communication has to be HIPAA compliant. Now, clients have to know which form is HIPAA compliant and which is not. And if they prefer to use HIPAA compliant methods, then you have to use them, right? So for example, I use SimplePractice as a platform, my EHR. They have a built-in messenger, and I use this messenger as a way to communicate with clients in a HIPAA compliant way. I'm also able to share files through SimplePractice, which is also HIPAA compliant, and clients can contact me and send me files all through SimplePractice, which is HIPAA compliant. So we have a way of talking and communicating and sharing information that is all HIPAA compliant. That is available to them. However, my email address is not HIPAA compliant, and neither is my phone. All the clients know that. This is not encrypted. This is not HIPAA compliant. If they want to contact me through that method, it's not what I recommend. They are able to do that. However, they have to sign my consent form that outlines the risks and all the risks of using that method, and also in letting them know that there is a HIPAA compliant method available for all communication that they want, and they can contact me that way. So I think there's two ways of going about it. One, you can get a HIPAA compliant email. Not a bad idea. Or you can also think about this other method of having a communication that is HIPAA compliant, whether through your EHR or something like that, having that be your main one, and then clients signing a consent form if they want to contact you in a non-HIPAA compliant way. All right. So that's a few thoughts on that. Hopefully that points you in the right direction. And if you are just joining or you're new here, the way we kind of do this is you just leave a comment down below. If you have questions, if you have comments, you want to add to the conversation, you can put your questions and comments down below. Sometimes questions come through email, or questions are left on other videos. Let's see if we have any other questions that people had asked. Yeah, so we had another question as well. Someone asked if your PLLC does not protect you from malpractice. And this is something we talked about yesterday in another office hours. If you have a PLLC, that is not going to protect you, the therapist, from malpractice or anything like that. And that's a misconception. People think that if they establish a PLLC, then they're going to be all their personal finances will be protected from malpractice lawsuits and things like that. This is not the case. In fact, in the state of New York, licensed professionals have to establish a PLLC, which stands for Professional Limited Liability Company, and they're not able to establish a limited liability company. And one of the reasons is if you have a limited liability company, right, for unlicensed work or for a business that's not providing, licensed services, then you are protected. Your personal assets are protected from, suits and things like that. As a licensed professional, that's not the case. You are still liable, and all of your assets are at risk for any malpractice that happens. Malpractice insurance is your only defense in that regard. So then someone asked, well, what's the point of having a PLLC? The point is, it's twofold. One, it's for creating a separate business entity, which then allows you to create a business bank account, obtain an EIN, and create separation between you as an individual and your business. However, you can do this a different way. You can get a DBA. It's called a doing business as. We have talked about that in other videos. I'll link those down below. And then the PLLC is also going to be for people who want to start a group practice. So let's say I hire three therapists. One of them does something wrong. The practice gets sued. I will be protected from their mistake. So a PLLC will protect you from your employees' mistakes. So that's one of the main reasons why you would want it, and you would actually need a business entity to start a group practice. Let's see here. Okay, so we have a question. It's a good question. If I hire a 1099 and I'm using Headway for insurance and for billing, do the 1099 clinicians need to have their own insurance liability, or do I add them to mine? And does Headway do the credentialing, or do I need to do that? So this is a good question. So if you are hiring a 1099 contractor, you do not need to add them to your malpractice insurance, or let me correct that. You don't need to provide them malpractice insurance. They actually have to, they're supposed to, have their own. Because remember, if you have a 1099 contractor, they are their own private practice working for you, right? So they have to have their own tools, basically. And malpractice is one of them. Now, what I would do is I would call your own malpractice broker, whoever it is, and say, I have contractors working for me. What do you suggest I do to protect myself? And then they'll tell you what you need to do. However, the 1099 contractor should carry their own malpractice insurance. Additionally, you're asking, does Headway do their credentialing? So when I worked with Headway to start my group practice, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can do the credentialing on behalf of the contractor. It's a bit cumbersome. You have to answer a lot of questions that are really difficult to answer. It doesn't really work very well. Or Headway will actually credential them for you. They will set up a call with the contractor and they'll get them all credentialed. And that process looks the exact same as it did for you. There's really no difference there other than they will be under your practice and under your EIN. A question about ALMA. Does a client need an account with ALMA in order to use this service? Let me see here. So does a client need an account? So I am not 100% sure how it works from the client's end. What I do know is that for clients, using ALMA is free. It's like using any other directory. I think that if you, as the therapist, are using ALMA to bill their insurance, then the client is going to have some sort of account, again, which is free, that allows them to kind of log in and look at invoices and pay co-pays and things like that. So in that regard, they'll have to have an account. From my understanding, though, if you go to the ALMA website as a therapy seeker, it looks like it's free and you can just set up a consultation. In fact, let me screen share really quick and see if we can do it on our end and see what it actually looks like. So just give me 1 sec to pull up the internet and we'll take a look at that. Right now, I'm just logging into ALMA and I'm seeing what it looks like from the, from the client perspective, just to kind of see what it will look like if we wanted to, let's see. All right, here we go. Let me share my screen with you. Let's see. Okay, so this is my ALMA profile. Please forgive me for the ridiculously large headshot here. I don't know why it looks like that. But anyway, I'm not logged into ALMA or anything like that. I'm just browsing the internet over here. And so this is what it would look like if you were trying to find me. I'm not logged in. I have no account. Let's click Request Consult. And it looks like you can go ahead and book a consult without having to log in or anything like that. You would just select the time and move forward. So yes, to answer your question, it looks like you do not need an account in order to book a consultation. So let's go ahead and close that out. Great question. All right. All right, we have another ALMA-related question. Can you walk me through your workflow using ALMA and SimplePractice? Absolutely. I really like to talk about this. Let me take a sip of water real quick. All right, so my method of working with ALMA and SimplePractice, it pretty much involves this mindset. So I think about ALMA as a tool for your private practice, right? ALMA is not going to be most of these things like ALMA, Headway, they're not one and done tools. Like they're not something you just, it doesn't provide everything. So for example, ALMA is really good with insurance credentialing and billing. It's not the best EHR or medical record, right? So I picked a main tool for my practice, which is SimplePractice. This is where I keep all my records. This is where my calendar is kept. This is where all my appointments live. So this is like my main hub is SimplePractice. Now, when I think about ALMA, I think about it as a billing tool for insurance. So I use it only for that. So let's say, for example, a client comes to me and they're going to be using ALMA for their insurance, and they request a consult with me from ALMA, right? So we get the email, a consult request is made via ALMA, and you're aware of it. I immediately take that request and I put it into SimplePractice. So now that client becomes a client in my SimplePractice because, again, this is my home base, right? And then from there, I will have the consultation with the client. I'll let them know that they're going to be getting emails. My intake packet is all in SimplePractice. So that gets sent out. So now that client lives in my SimplePractice, right? And then when I start to see that client, what I'll usually do is I will see them, and then you need to pick a CPT code, right? Like a 90834, 90837, however long you're doing your session for. And in SimplePractice, you can actually create dummy CPT codes. So what I'll usually do is I'll create a CPT code that says ALMA 90834. And then the cost will be $0 because you're not going to want to have your ALMA payments reflected in SimplePractice because at the end of the year for taxes, it's going to be all confusing. So I'll have an ALMA 90834. That is what I'll put the client under. I'll document everything in ALMA, everything in SimplePractice as you would for your EHR, your progress note, your treatment plan. And then when it's time to bill insurance, I log into ALMA, and then I do their, whatever it is that for their billing, which is simply to kind of add the diagnosis and the codes and click submit. And then you do have to manually use the calendars. So I will make sure that my SimplePractice calendar for my ALMA clients is reflected inside of ALMA. That's a little bit tedious, but again, you have to think about which is your home base, and then which tools are you using, and then how do you most efficiently use those tools. And that is my process, at least for now, for working with ALMA and SimplePractice. I hope that made sense. It makes sense to me because I do it every day, but sometimes when I try to talk about it, it might come across as confusing. If that makes sense, let me know. If it doesn't and you want more clarification, let me know. I'm happy to provide that as well. So a question about headway and contracts for 1099s. Do I need to provide my own clinical contract with my 1099 if I'm going through headway, or does the 1099 sign a contract with headway on their own? So it's actually going to be both. Whatever process you went through with headway to be credentialed is the same exact process that your 1099 is going to have to go through as well. Nothing is different. Every single thing is exactly the same. So that process will be identical. Now, when you're talking about a contract between you and the 1099, that is something separate from headway. Your contract, and you'll want to consult an attorney about this and have an attorney write it for you, or find someone who already has a template in place. But you're basically creating a contract to agree on what exactly the 1099 is going to do and what they're willing to do, and you're both agreeing to this, and that's what that contract's about. So that's separate from headway, right? So two separate things. One, the paneling with headway, that's separate from your contract. That is simply the billing tool that you're using with them. And then you do need to have your own contract with them, which is your agreement between them, your contractor, and you for the services and the work that they're going to do for you. So this is a question about discharge planning and headway. The way I think about this, you kind of like before, think about headway as a billing tool, not necessarily impacting how you document or what you document. So you are going to do discharge plans in compliance with state laws, licensing guidelines, all that kind of stuff. So you want to consult the New York State website and your licensing board to make sure you're kind of taking notes properly. I know that's a big concern with people. They want to make sure that they are kind of documenting properly. However, let's say you have a client and that they use headway for their insurance. Or you have a client that comes private pay and you just have them in your EHR, or they're not using headway. All the documentation is the same. So whatever the billing, like whether headway, ALMA, you should always be documenting consistently, following the most up-to-date licensing guidelines, and so that should not be impacted by whether a client is on headway, ALMA, or private pay. When working with a 1099, who gives the contractor the actual 1099 at the end of the year? Will headway or will you? So I think headway will probably send it to you, and then you send it to them. And I'm sure if you contact headway, you can talk to them about it. If you want headway to send it, they probably can. If you want to send it, you can as well. I think there's some flexibility there. But when you're making the group account with headway, that's something you're going to want to tell them what your preference is. Can you keep your own progress notes instead of placing them in Headway portal when having a group practice? Yes. So you, again, like I mentioned before, I don't keep any notes inside of Headway or ALMA or any other tool like that. All my notes live inside of SimplePractice. And basically, Headway and ALMA are billing tools, right? So you're billing through them, but you're not necessarily keeping your notes through them. You're keeping your notes, however you do it. If you do it in SimplePractice, therapy notes, you do it by paper. As long as you're keeping your records in some sort of HIPAA compliant fashion, then that is totally fine. They don't all have to live inside of Headway, ALMA. It doesn't have to be in all of them, just one of them, right? That's why I encourage every person starting a private practice or a group practice to pick a home base. Pick a EHR that works for you and make that your home base. Is SimplePractice really needed when using Headway or ALMA? So I think this is going to come down to, so I guess the way I write notes is I stick to the most strict and standard guidelines. So I'm writing intake notes, progress notes, discharge plans, treatment plans. I'm doing a variety of scales and tools, PHQ-9, GAD-7, ASRS, all these kinds of screeners. And ALMA is not equipped to handle all of that. I don't know if they have treatment plans. It's just not that vibrant quite yet. So they don't have everything that I like to do in my record keeping, which is why I use SimplePractice. But think about it this way also, the tool itself is not what's important. It's your ability to keep the required documentation. So if you're keeping it on paper, then that's fine. It just has to be still whatever is required by the state and licensing laws, and has to be HIPAA compliant. SimplePractice is just a tool to keep those records, right? So think about all these things as tools that help a therapist do their job better. A therapist existed before SimplePractice, ALMA, and Headway. So I think these are platforms that make our lives easier, and they help us to perform services much more efficiently. But no, you do not need SimplePractice, but you do need to keep records well, thoroughly, and up to par with guidelines. However you want to do that, that's up to you. I'm really glad this is helpful for you. I really appreciate creating this space for people to learn and to kind of grow in their private practice journey. Do I need to include the fact that I use ALMA or Headway for billing in my consent form? It's a good question. I'm not 100% sure what's required or needed. And just as a reminder, as I give in all of my private practice talks here, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't provide legal advice. I'm not an accountant. I don't provide financial advice. I speak to you about my experience. But one thing that you do want to consider is that when you use Headway or ALMA, a client is going to know that because let's say you bill their insurance company through ALMA or Headway, they're going to get an email from ALMA or Headway. So it's wise to probably inform the client that you are using ALMA and Headway. You also sign a BAA agreement with ALMA or Headway, which I won't get into the complexities of that, but this is kind of how a therapist is able to remain HIPAA compliant while also using outside services like ALMA and Headway. And ALMA and Headway do have you sign the BAA. So everything is HIPAA compliant in that regard. So I do inform all my clients, like, yes, I use ALMA, I use Headway. This is what that service is. This is what these emails look like. So I practice with a spirit of transparency. So nothing should surprise my clients, so they all know about this. Do you use a different consent form for private pay versus clients who use insurance? I do not use a separate consent form. I address both of these potential clients in one form. So there'll be a paragraph about insurance, there'll be a paragraph about private pay, and this is because sometimes clients start as insurance and they end up in private pay, and then vice versa. Some start private pay, some go to insurance, people go back and forth. So no, I do not have a different one. I have both of these addressed in the same consent form. I would advise anyone looking for good consent forms or for an intake packet, the lawyer I use, his name is Bruce. I'll put his information down below. He'll actually sell therapists an intake packet that he's written himself. He's an attorney and also a trained psychologist. So I will leave that information down below. The intake packet is real solid. When you are hiring therapists or posting a job listing on Indeed, for example, do you mention Headway or your own practice name? So this is a good question. Again, we're going to go back to this idea that Headway, ALMA, all these things are tools for your practice. So let's just imagine, let's just use this hypothetical to help make sense of this. Let's say you're applying for a job at Target, right? You're applying for, a cashier position at Target. You see that job posting on Indeed. Target is not going to tell you what types of cashiers they use, like the actual machine. They're not going to tell you what software they use to do all their inventory and merchandising. They're not going to tell you, what conveyor belts they use. They're going to tell you the job description and what it is that they want you to do so that you can decide if this is a job you want. Private practice is no different. You're not there to tell all of the therapists all of the back end stuff, what tools you use. So no, you do not need to put that in a job listing. This is simply the tool you're using to bill for insurance purposes. That being said though, you have to decide for yourself what kind of manager you're going to be, and what kind of information you disclose to your therapist. If you work with your therapist and you want them to know what tools you use, that's fine. I think that's totally up to you. But you don't have to go around. I think it's kind of overkill to kind of list out all these things on your job posting. You simply just want to put what the job is, what you're looking for, and things like that. In your experience, what do you think is a reasonable cancellation policy for insurance clients, including any fees that clients would be responsible for out of pocket? So a couple things to think about here. A cancellation policy will always be out of pocket. It is never covered by insurance. So this is, no matter what, it's going to be out of pocket. And when you think about a cancellation policy, this is largely going to come down to personal preference, ethics, your own, your own thoughts about it. So there's no real clear-cut answer. A couple of things, I guess, principles to kind of keep in mind is one, is I try to have a cancellation policy that is beneficial for both the client and the practice. And when I talk about a cancellation policy being beneficial for the client, you do want therapy to be something that it's not invaluable. It's not something that we can just throw away. It's a valuable service for clients, and it's also something that you set aside time for a particular client to have a slot, and that slot is of value, right? It's how you make your living. So the cancellation policy helps the client to understand the value of that slot, while also creating a little bit of structure to help them maintain that slot when possible. It also benefits you because you don't want to have no cancellation policy or a loose cancellation policy where you're planning a particular you're planning for a certain amount of income for a particular month or a particular week, and then all of a sudden you have all these cancellations, and then you have you don't have anything. This is not sustainable, right? This is not something that is going to work. And so you want the cancellation policy in place there so that if a spot does go, a spot gets canceled and then that slot can't be filled, you do want to have, you still have to make a living, right? Because that spot could have been filled by another client. So you want to think about these slots also as kind of like they hold value, right? Now, that being said, we are therapists, and I would imagine most of us are empathetic and sensitive, and we really want what's best for our client, and we don't want to put them through any type of hardship. And so I'm really transparent about my cancellation policy. I tell clients, this is what it is, and this is what it looks like, and I tell them that up front because I don't want to have to enforce it, so that's kind of one thing. I'm really open about it, and I tell them that even on the phone screen so they can decide if that cancellation policy works for them and if it doesn't, right? So I'll say it really early on, and then for me, I've decided the amount of time. I have a 48-hour cancellation policy, and this was simply determined because I have a very hard time filling a slot with less than 48 hours. If it's like one day, the spot goes unused. right? 48 hours, it's a bit easier. So I have a 48-hour policy. And then the amount, that's something that you can kind of just determine and think about what works for you, your financial goals. Hopefully this is that's a long, in-depth explanation. Hopefully that helps a little bit. It's a great question, a common question people often ask. How long did it take you to fill your solo private practice? Awesome question. People ask this all the time, and there's varying degrees of concern around this. And this is not a straightforward answer, right? I know people want, like, it took me this long, this is what I did. How long? Well, the first question is, what's full? What is a full practice, right? For some people it's 30, for some people it's 20, for some people it's 12. So you have to think about what entails a full practice. I'm guessing just from experience, you're probably asking how long does it take to get to about 20, 25, 30 clients. And then I also have to ask, what's the intention of asking this question? Because people usually ask for a few reasons. One, they want to know how they can fill up perhaps quicker, or they want to know how long the time will, like how long they can estimate it to be for them. And these things are great questions. However, they're really difficult to answer in the sense that, let's say, for example, I'm someone who has, I'm trained in DBT. I'm located in New York City. Right, I have some experience at a local hospital. So these are kind of some things I bring to the table, right? Now let's imagine there's another therapist who is considered an expert in their field. They have 25, 30 years of experience, and we both start in private practice at the same time. It's likely that the other therapist is going to fill up faster, which makes sense. They have more experience, they're an expert in their field, they might have a niche, and I might not fill up as fast. So asking how long is not the right question, because it's just going to make me feel bad. What you do want to know is why is that therapist filling up quicker? And maybe I determine that therapist has a specialty. Oh, okay, great. I want to work towards a specialty. Maybe I realize that they have a training in this area. Oh, I want to go to that training and learn more about that, right? So that's one thing to consider is learning about why people fill up quickly and what it is about them and their practice that enables them to fill up quickly. Other factors that contribute is time of year, right? So you'll notice that for some people, therapy seeking slows down in the summer, slows down in holidays, and then there's upticks and things like that. So this is going to be another kind of factor to consider. And then if you just want to know like general ballpark, one encouraging thing is I've never met a therapist who hasn't filled up, all right, ever. I've never met a therapist or talked to one who has not filled up. But the length of time it takes to fill up is always varying. For me personally, I can't remember exactly how long, but I want to say to get to a spot of maybe 20 clients, I think it took me over 6 months. It took a while. I have colleagues who got filled up in 1 month. I've seen longer than 6 months. So I want people to be really careful when they ask this question. Think about why you're asking it, and then maybe there's a different question we can ask. But hopefully that helps. This is supposed to be encouraging, so hopefully that's helpful. You guys are asking some really great questions. I'm going to check email to see if any questions have come through there. Feel free to ask more questions, add comments, just chat. That's fine as well. We're just here hanging out, talking about private practice. And also, please let me know if this information I'm sharing is helpful, if it's not, if it's confusing. I don't know everything. Sometimes I say things and it's confusing. Let me know down below. I would love to kind of get better at sharing. So please feel free to add comments as well about that. Let's see. And I'm just checking email and messages from other platforms to see if there's any other questions that are missing. What are your thoughts about the default consent forms in SimplePractice? Great question. My thoughts are that the default forms probably give a very good foundation. You have to imagine SimplePractice has a reputation to uphold, and so they're not going to put just junk on there. At the same time, they put out a universal template, and universal templates when it comes to legal things is probably not good to just stick with that. There's going to be a lot of nuances that you need to add into the consent form. So it's going to be your cancellation policy, for example. You have your own practice policies, what hours do you work, things like that. So I think the consent forms are a good place to start. My professional opinion is that you should always have your intake packet vetted by an attorney who specializes in healthcare. My intake packet was actually written by an attorney. Again, I'll leave a link down below. He was really great to work with. And that was because I wanted all the words and all the sentences to be as, protective and, as possible. And I'm not a lawyer, so I can't do that. And I also know that SimplePractice, they're not lawyers or attorneys either. And so I wanted to go that route. So I did invest in that. And to me, that was a really worthwhile investment. It gives a lot of peace of mind. I have colleagues, though, who use the SimplePractice forms, and they find them to be fine. Again, the biggest takeaway for me is that part of running a private practice, part of doing good work and setting yourself up for success is to invest in meaningful consultations. And 2 consultations I always recommend if you're just starting out is an attorney and an accountant. These are 2 professionals you should absolutely consult with when starting or running a private practice. And you will want an ongoing relationship, probably, with an attorney for at least offhanded questions you might have, or, I've had to call a couple times because I have different things that pop up. And an accountant, you'll definitely want a relationship with them for tax purposes and finance questions that come up. It's part of the cost of running your business is to have those relationships. So totally invest in that. Great stuff. There's tons of options out there. I actually created a free database. I'll leave a link to that down below as well. One of my intentions was to create a space where there's like word of mouth referrals, because you Google things, there's a lot of sponsored content, there's a lot of things that you don't know where this comes from. But I have curated a database that has word of mouth referrals for attorneys, accountants, things like that. It's small, but it's growing. But again, these are all word of mouth referrals that other therapists have used. So you can check out different attorneys there, accountants. I'll leave that link down below. That's totally free to sign up for. What is the benefit of a PLLC for a solo practitioner who plans to remain solo? A great question. I've talked about this a couple times, and I think it's definitely worth repeating. This is something that people are always confused about. So let's just briefly talk about PLLC again. So a PLLC is going to be called a professional limited liability company. Not all states require it. New York, that's where I'm located, is a state that requires a PLLC. When is it required? It's required for licensed professionals to provide licensed services. So for example, if you're a therapist, you're a licensed professional, right? You need a license to provide therapy, whether LCSW, LMHC, whatever it may be. And because you're providing a licensed service, which is therapy, you're required to have a PLLC. And what that does, it actually, there's 2 things. One, it creates separation between you as a person and your business. And that's a good thing. With that separation, you can have an EIN, which is an employee, one of those 2, identification number, right? EIN, tax ID, which then allows you to open up a business bank account. So that's one major benefit. The second thing, and this is not a benefit, but people think it is that a PLLC will protect your personal assets from any mistakes you might make as a therapist. Not true. Actually, you have less protection with a PLLC than an LLC. So an LLC, which let's just imagine we open up a store that sells shoes. You can have an LLC. You're not providing a licensed service. You're not doing anything that requires a professional license. So you have an LLC, right? And what you hear is that when you do that, whatever, assets are a part of that business, like that's at risk for any issues that happen at work, but your personal finances are safe. When you have a PLLC, that's not the case. All of your assets are at risk all the time. This is why you want good malpractice insurance. That's what's really going to protect you. Now, a PLLC is going to be mainly for people who want to start a group practice, because then if I have a PLLC and I start a group practice and I have 5 employees, I myself am protected from my employees' mistakes. So it will protect you in that regard, right? So if you're a solo practitioner and you plan to stay solo, the PLLC is going to be good to create that business entity, and there might be some tax benefits, but I can't really speak much to that. Other than that, the tax benefits and the bank account and the separation, I'm not sure there's much more beyond that if you plan to stay solo. You can do a DBA, which is the doing business as, without establishing the PLLC and still get the EIN and still open up the business bank account. So there's another way to do it as well. If you really want nuanced information about tax benefits and things like that, an accountant is going to be the right person to ask. But those are the main kind of points about PLLCs, and people often overlook those things. But great question, good things to consider. Do you recommend consulting with a lawyer and or accountant when licensed in multiple states? I recently moved to New York from California, and I'm licensed in California, New York, and New Jersey. I'm thinking about taxes. Absolutely. Absolutely. You want to consult with an accountant. Now, what I've found is that most of these accountants will provide a free 15-minute consult, something like that. I'd recommend telling them your situation. Now, the reason I recommend this is because I'm also licensed in multiple states. I'm licensed in New York and New Jersey. And there were some things I was not aware of at all. So, for example, and this is so nuanced, I'm not an expert on this, but this is what I came across, and it's going to be helpful for you when you think about consulting an accountant. Is, let's say you live in New York, you're licensed in California, you're seeing a California client, and you provide a service to a client who's in California where you're licensed but not sitting, but the client is sitting in California. What is really confusing is where, like from a tax perspective, where is that service considered rendered? So is that New York tax or is that California tax, right? And that I don't know. That is so nuanced, and it goes into so many different things. An accountant has to look into that for you. I know my accountant, he's really good. He had to do research on some of these things. So absolutely, when it comes to taxes, you want to consult an accountant, because at the end of the year, you're going to probably have to divide up, where your service is provided. Obviously, you're sitting in New York, but where were your clients? So I've had to divide up clients by location. That's another thing to consider. Great question. I didn't even know that until the end of the year. I had to go back and organize a whole bunch of stuff, and it took a lot of time. So yes, definitely consult an accountant about that. Awesome question though. And we often think about licensing simply as like can you provide this service? But as a private practitioner, there's the business side of things too. Where does that get taxed? What state? Does it count as a service from California or New York? So that stuff gets all confusing. But yeah, thank you for reminding me. That's a great question. That one doesn't come up that often. Just out of curiosity, are you guys able to hear me okay? Is everything pretty clear? Um, if I am, just let me know down in the comments. I'll keep going. Um, let's see. That seems like a headache. Is it really worth it to be licensed in multiple states? Great question. It is worth it. I do think it's worth it. If you're already licensed, it's worth it. If you're thinking about expanding your practice, it's totally worth it. Now it sounds like a headache, and this is, well, let me see. Is it a headache? It was mainly a headache because I wasn't aware of it, and I had to go back and organize things. However, this year, as I do my kind of organization in SimplePractice, I'm able to divide up clients by the state that they're in. And so at the end of the year, when I hand all my stuff to my accountant, it's already going to be divided and will not be a headache. Your accountant will actually will do all that for you, right? So you're not doing those taxes. That will be done by the accountant at the end of the year. The headache was when the accountant said, "Hey, where were all these clients located?" And I was like, "Oh gosh, I can find out, but I have to go back and count it." Right? So it's not really a headache, especially if you know up front. So this is why you want an accountant who's informed and aware. I see you have a link to your attorney. Do you have a link to your accountant as well? I will leave a link down below to the accountant that I use. I will also leave a link to the directory that I've created that has other accountants and attorneys as well, so you don't feel like you have to use the people that I use. The people I've used have been good. I really stand by the work that they do. However, I want people to feel like they can make that choice on their own, but I will certainly leave the link to them both down below, as well as the directory. How did you determine where you wanted to be licensed? Great question. So I've been licensed for quite a while. I guess the first one was I lived in the state of New York, so I got licensed there. Right. That's where I live. That's where I do. That's where I live. So that was number one. Number two is actually I was inspired by some of my clients to get a license in New Jersey. I had a good number of them starting to move, and we wanted to continue to work together. So I decided, why not get a license in New Jersey as well? And I chose that because it was practical. One, some of my clients were there. And then two, I live in New York and I'm close to New Jersey, so I can expand my reach to different clients and provide my services to clients in a state that is both close and where some of my clients were actually moving to. So that's how I chose. I think you can think a couple ways. I think first and foremost, you want to be licensed where you live, most likely. But with the pandemic and the switch to virtual, you might not necessarily have to think about that. But I think that's a good one. License where you live. And then you can also think about, where are their needs? What states, what areas, what locations? That's another way to kind of think about it as well. But for me personally, it came very naturally and practically where I lived and then where my clients were. That's kind of how I chose that. And you also want to think about how easy it is to be licensed in that other state. For New York to New Jersey, it required like an application and then getting fingerprinted and that stuff, but I didn't need to like retest or anything like that. It took a long time for it to all be finished, but it wasn't difficult in the sense that I had to like do anything like retest or anything. I think some states are difficult to get or licensed in the other state. So another thing to think about. right, looks like we got some downtime in the questions. We'll hang out for another 15 minutes or so. While we're waiting, I'm curious for the people who are here, if you're comfortable, where are you at in your private practice journey? Sometimes it's helpful to know, but only if you're comfortable. Don't feel obliged. I'm gonna see if there are any other questions coming through. If you're just joining, welcome. We're just hanging out, answering questions about private practice, group practice. No matter where you are in your journey, feel free to ask a question. All questions are welcome. All questions are good. You're at the contemplation stage of your private practice journey. Awesome. Really great stage, an exciting stage, one with a lot of choice and things like that. You're asking some really great questions. I can say that for sure. It's a journey for sure. It's a fantastic journey, but certainly a journey worth considering. Awesome. Sounds great. I live in a big city with lots of therapists. Thoughts and advice about marketing to smaller towns. Yeah, so I think that's a great question. When we think about living in a big city, I'm also in a big city. I mean, New York, right? One of the biggest. It's usually saturated with therapists. If you want to try to break into a smaller town, a couple things you want to think about. You want to think about the needs of that town, right? So one of the benefits of a small town is that there's a lot of, it's not a benefit actually. Let me reword that. One of the things about small towns is that there's often not access to endless services, right? Like there are in a city. You move to a city like New York, you need any service you want. Being in a small town, there's probably not as much access. That is not good. Right? That's not a benefit. I'm not saying that's like a universal benefit. But as a therapist, you have the opportunity to provide a needed service to a small town. So what is your specialty? What's your niche? And is it something that small town is looking for? So one thing you can do in your contemplation journey is think about what are some needs? What are some things that are lacking in a small town or the towns around you? And then you can perhaps get trained up. Maybe it's ADHD work. Maybe it's I don't know, DBT. I don't know, whatever it may be. You want to do some market research. A couple places you can call or kind of contact, LinkedIn, things like this. School social workers, they usually have a good sense of like what resources are lacking. And hospital social workers who do discharge planning will also have a good sense of what services are lacking. These are just starting points for some research into, what kind of specialty do you want to develop? What niche would be valuable to the community? And then marketing in a small town, you can do anything from flyers, right? Handing out flyers and business cards, to, sometimes small towns have like public boards, like pin boards where you can post your flyers, your handbills or your, I'm losing the word, business cards. And then because the small town has less people, sometimes just going in to a doctor's office, going into a school, talking to the social worker, talking to the doctor. These are intimidating. I know they're difficult, but there are some ways that you can market, and I think they would be effective. Absolutely. You have a solo practice, you just started with ALMA, you're figuring out your balance between private pay and insurance clients, which has been stressful. You're not alone. This is something people wrestle with all the time. They want to try to figure out how to balance it. Can they, should they, how do you do it? This is certainly something people are always thinking about and wrestling through. And I think one piece of advice that I do like to give is, you're going to get a lot of people telling you that, you should do it this way, you could do it that way. Follow this advice, you'll be all cash pay. You want to be really cautious about that. Everyone's journey is different. I think there's a lot of things we can glean from all sorts of different people. But you want to be, don't allow, everything to sway you. It's certainly a wrestling match, and you will, you'll learn and grow throughout the process. And just so you guys know, if you have not been here before, I make videos like this all the time. I recently started to do these live streams where I answer questions live, but for the last couple of years, I've actually made videos on a weekly basis almost. So if you go to my YouTube channel, you can go all the way back to the beginning. I've made videos about all sorts of different topics, all related to private practice. My mission is really to provide information that's accessible, actionable, free to people who are looking to start their private practice, point them in the right direction. So you can watch all those videos if you'd like. If you haven't done so, subscribing to the channel is really helpful. You don't have to, only if you want to though. It helps me out, it helps me make videos like this. But yeah, I have tons of videos, and I've done a lot of these. This is my 9th private practice office hours. I plan to do more in the future. I did 3 this week, right? So I hope to do more. And then if there's questions you still have, a lot of times if you go back to the other group the private practice office hours, the question's been asked and I probably went through an answer. So feel free to skim those as well. Thank you so much. That's awesome. I really, really appreciate that. Just checking my phone. Any more questions coming through? Gonna hang out for about 10 more minutes. Happy to answer more questions. If you want to just grab some coffee, hang out, talk about private practice, you're welcome to do so. I see people coming and going. Some people go, some people come. If you're just getting here, we're gonna hang out for 10 more minutes or so. Plenty of time to ask more questions. Glad to have you. This will be my first time not pairing my practice with some sort of contract work, which feels scary. Do you have any guidance for having faith in my practice alone, providing me with enough income? So this is a great question and a real valid concern that a lot of people share. So a couple things just to kind of talk on this a little bit. You said it feels scary. Absolutely, it is scary. right? So I think that feeling is absolutely normal and appropriate for what you're doing. You're going out on your own for the first time. So to feel scared is totally normal. And then you're asking about how do I have faith in my practice alone? Well, I think first is to kind of reflect on your past experiences, and obviously I don't know your past experiences or anything, but assuming you've done contract work and you're now going out on your own, you can really think about your past experiences and the past work you've done with clients, and the success you've had there. And then second, you're just starting for the very first time doing your own work, right? So faith will, in your private practice, will come as you do your private practice, right? As you kind of go through the motions. And I think when we kind of think about this idea of providing you with enough income, as therapists, we often think that this is kind of up to chance or up to just, if it happens, it happens, or maybe I'll make it, or maybe I won't. I want to encourage you, because as a therapist, I don't have math, I don't do math, I don't do calculations very well, but I was encouraged to do simple calculations. Think about the income that you need to live, the income that you want, and this kind of thing. And then do some simple calculations to determine exactly what milestones you need to hit to provide that living for yourself. That way it's not some scary, arbitrary what if, but it's more of that's what I need. I'm hitting that target, or I'm not hitting that target. If I am, awesome, I can keep going. If not, do I need to supplement for a little longer? Right, so it doesn't have to be blind faith either. Do some simple calculations, determine what the math is on what you need, what you want, and use that also as a guide to make decisions. Awesome question. If you own your own business, for the most part, your taxes are paid quarterly. This was advice from an accountant. Quarterly taxes. You want to speak to an accountant to get specific, but generally, as private practice owner, as a therapist, not a therapist, as a business owner, you pay quarterly taxes. And a quick question for you guys, those of you who are listening in and watching, is this format helpful? Do you find this kind of like you type questions, I respond? Is this helpful? Do you guys have any thoughts about other kind of things that would be helpful, things that could be on the screen? Or, I'm just always looking for ways to improve this kind of, this thing to provide more value for people. Do you guys have any feedback or thoughts about what this is like? Awesome. Sounds like you think it's very helpful as is. I appreciate that. Awesome. Call-in show. That sounds like a cool idea. It might be hard to be answering phone calls though. But I'll think about ways we can maybe do something like that. That's a great thought. I like to think of the chat as kind of the call-in. For those joining or just logging in, we're going to hang out for a couple more minutes. Feel free to ask more questions, leave comments in the chat box. Well, it's a little slow, just hanging out, so feel free to chat it up in the box as well. How long have you been in practice? I have been doing therapy for a while now, over a decade, doing therapy and doing individual work. As far as private practice, 23. I've been doing research and the process of starting private practice for probably around 4 years or something, but I officially opened up, I think I'm all confused because of the pandemic, I think 3 years ago, maybe a little less. Do you recommend therapists set up Google Ads themselves or hire an ad agency? They can be very expensive. Great question. Well, let me first think about, let's talk on a little bit about what Google Ads are going to do, right? So Google Ads are obviously going to be for therapists and group practices who want to expand their reach fairly extensively. We do know that Google Ads is effective. Every big company uses them, right? They're everywhere. The downside is that they're super expensive. They get costly very quick. And in order to see results, you need to invest a lot into Google Ads. I've played around with Google Ads just to learn how to work it, but did not invest much into it and didn't get much out of it because I, just was toying with it to learn how to work it. I think if you're really invested in seeing results from Google Ads, hiring a company would be a good idea. I do think, though, that might be an investment for once you've grown to a certain point, because it's going to be a lot of upfront cost and it's going to take a while to see the return on that. So if if you're just starting, maybe it's getting the ball rolling with standard methods like Psychology Today, things like that. And then once you get to a certain place, you're saying, I want to really ramp it up, then maybe that would be helpful. You can also try it yourself and just play around with it, just to get to learn how to work it a bit. But you have to think that there are people who do that for a living. They manage ads. So I think it would be an investment that would perhaps yield a return, but it's extremely costly. That is right on the money. That's some thoughts I have on that. Does that help? And you have any other questions about that or anything else to add? Awesome. Okay, so we will go for I will end it at 3:05. That's 4 more minutes. Again, I'm gonna do these more, so I'll be hopping back on next week at some point. We'll answer more questions. Don't feel like you have to get them all in now, but we'll answer more until 3:05. Let's see. Is it possible to be too niched down? I think perhaps it could be. It could be possible. You kind of want to find that sweet spot, right? There's that broad range of therapists who say they do everything. I do CBT, DBT. I see all these kinds of clients, and it's so broad. It's just a massive generalization, right? So that's not helpful. And then you kind of if you get so specific, I work with only this age group in this town at this time. And I'm being facetious here, but it is possible to be too niched down. When you think about a niche, you want to think about a couple things. One, you want to think about personal interest, right? So that's number one. You want to find a niche that you actually enjoy. Number two, though, is like, what's the need? So a niche, you don't want it to be like uninformed. What need is there in your community, your place of practice in general? Just to give a personal example, I noticed that there was a need for DBT therapy. That was, for a therapist who takes insurance to do DBT therapy. Now, this is not the most, niched down you can get, but it's fairly niched down, right? It's, a particular type of therapy, DBT, take insurance, work in New York. I could probably go down more, and I'm always learning to go down more. And in fact, I have gone down a bit more than that. But if you think that wasn't just because I love DBT, although I love DBT and I like providing that service, I noticed as I was learning there was a need in that area. But if I niche down to like I only do DBT with this one age and this one population, that could be too limiting, right? So you want to find that middle ground. Hopefully that's how you think. All right, we're gonna wrap up here. It was awesome chatting with everyone. Again, I'll be doing this again next week. Please do subscribe down below if you haven't done so already. That's really helpful. Like the video, share the video. That is all really helpful for me, but only if you want to. No pressure there. Awesome. I'm glad it's been helpful. Hope to see you again, and enjoy your weekend, and I will see you soon.